Welcome back to TECcast. We're mixing it up this year. In our first 2 seasons, we did long-form interviews with individual teachers. This year, we decided to have one big roundtable conversation with teachers from several academic departments coming together to grapple with AI and what it means for education. We had Matt Bardot from Math and Computer Science, Katie Jewett and Jorge Rodriguez from Languages, Janet De Leon from English, Reverend Aaron, and of course yours truly from HPRSS. So when we got to my office, we all watched OpenAI's spring update together and then hit record. Since our conversation begins with that initial reaction, if you haven't seen that spring update video yet, we highly recommend you watch that first. It's linked in the show notes below, and then circle back to this conversation. And just one final note, we edited the audio of this podcast with an AI editing tool called Descript that lets you edit audio by modifying a transcript. If anyone's ever edited audio with waveform, you know how tedious it can get. But with Descript, it's as simple as editing written text. The link is below in the show notes. If you're interested in getting a subscription, talk to me. We'll be happy to hook you up. So without further ado, here is our AI Roundtable.
It's interesting. It's good that it's faster, that it's a little bit more natural. I mean, still, whenever I think about ChatGPT, I always imagine I'm talking to a young intern, right, someone who is eager to please, but maybe is easily confused, but knows a surprising amount about things. Like you think, oh, you're so young. How could you know this? And I think it still felt that way to me a little bit. So I didn't feel like it was a quantum jump. I think the first GPT is sort of a big deal to some degree, but I think these things struggle to continue to jump. So
yeah,
it felt to me like an advertisement. In all honesty, it felt quite scripted and flashy and all very, very premeditated. And I thought that the fact that they pretty much glossed over the idea of the safety challenges. Yes, they mentioned them, but they didn't really say. They just said something like they were paying attention to them. I don't know. I guess I'm just wondering what's under the hood.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. Yeah.
I think I agree with what you're saying, Kitty. I don't know about the voice.
Yeah.
Just the voice was just strange and way too coquettish for my liking. I'm like, this is supposed to be a tool. I'm like, well, what would another voice sound like? Would it still have that attitude of, ooh, look at me, let me show you something? And so I just thought that was off-putting. But I can see some of the visual aspects. So it's like, okay, how could we use this in real time where I'm not so strangely weirded out by this? But I'm thinking about my stepdad who has macular degeneration and he's blind, he can't see anymore, and how he'd still be able to use his phone and do things without feeling so frustrated. But I'm still not sure how I would use this in my classroom. And that's my Achilles heel.
In my case, I'm still processing. I think this is, my reaction right away is to think, how should I apply all this technology in the classroom with the students, or how fast it's moving and what is the potential. But just to feel that I can combine a video with text and audio at the same time, I feel that I'm getting closer. I'm not saying close, but getting closer to recreate what is a real environment. I mean, the extreme case, the ideal case for me is just to travel abroad and let students to be by themselves alone, and then they will learn right away, the immersion, real. But this is getting closer. So if I can see the potential to recreate that, it looks at it is a good practice. Just to finish the idea, I'm kind of improvising, but I know that the most challenging communication skills is talking. And this gives you a little support, thinking from the student's perspective, to kind of relax and start talking more. I don't know. I'm still processing all of this.
It's such an interesting idea to have a homework assignment where maybe you say, I'm talking to this AI, tell the AI that you want to have a conversation about the weather in Spanish, right, and record that conversation, or have as an evidence of what was said, that be a way to to really have a conversation in a foreign language that might even lower the stakes a little bit, right? Because you're not actually talking to a person.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
One thing that came to my mind with all of this is, so Meta, which is the new name that Zuckerberg gave Facebook, they have, if you guys have seen their new glasses that they have that are AI, they have speakers built in, so you don't have to wear ear pods or AirPods and so on. And they have microphones, so you can use them as a phone. And they have a little camera up front, so if you want to just take a quick snapshot without having to pull out your phone or what have you, and it can do little 60-second clips. But I do find I'm a huge Star Trek nerd. I love Star Trek, and one of the things I love is when they always talk to the computer, and that you can give any. And I've had smart speakers at my house for like 5 years. I've been using these things, and I have all my lights set up and turn on the lights, turn on the air conditioner, all that stuff. And it is quite helpful. It's like extremely helpful. And I have found, I don't think the current iteration, I mean, it's great for like the Chat GPT stuff for like coming up with the way that people use it, seemingly like it can generate information, it can pull all kinds of stuff and explain stuff. What I'm excited about, which it's not able to do yet, is in the future when it can interface with our Outlook calendar or all manner of different things where I can ask it, okay, what's my next appointment coming up? Or, hey, can you quickly, like if I had a pair of glasses where I could just quickly say a wake word and say, hey, can you add this appointment on my calendar? And it would know to put it on my Microsoft calendar, not my Google calendar. You know what I mean? Depending on whatever you use. That's what I find especially cool and interesting and exciting to be able to, because like you said, like an intern, it's like an assistant that you just have all the time. I similarly, I don't know how I would necessarily use it in a classroom context. I do think like some of the tutoring prospects could seem very interesting, like a student using it to help the student learn math or explain a concept or something. But I don't know about classroom setting yet. I don't know. But that could be a lack of imagination on my part, or maybe I just don't know. I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough yet.
There is a company in New Zealand, Immerse Me. They have been using virtual reality to put language students in I think it's a context kind of like what you're saying. So you are a student going, or you're a person just going to a bread shop in Paris, and you need to order, certain loaves of bread, or you look at all the croissants or the pâtisserie or whatever you want, and you decide what you want. And it was, I would say 2 years ago, it was a little rough, but now it's getting better. Yep. And I think about, the API, whatever these tools are that are being sold to these other applications, that's where I think it gets really exciting.
I was looking, I haven't played around with the new 4.0 thing. But looking at some of the featured things, there was something I saw in here that was creative writing coach, where it would read your work and give your feedback to improve your skills. I haven't tried that yet. I have put in a prompt and asked, write me a poem about blah, 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 because I was just curious, what can this thing do? And it was laughable, and I didn't save it because it was just that bad. But I'm curious to try something like that. We're doing a writing workshop tomorrow in my class with their poems, and I'm curious what kind of feedback would it give them. But I still, as a teacher, wouldn't, 'cause I've tried it, to have it look at a student's piece of work, see what their feedback is, and then use it. I'm like, why do I need a middleman? I just read it myself, because no matter what, I would read it. And then I have to also read the feedback that the ChatGPT is giving me. Like, I can do that. So I'm not, that's where I get stuck for application in the classroom with students, not using it necessarily like trying to come up with prompts or stuff, doing a rubric. That I see myself using. I have used it, right, but not the other one.
I think sometimes a way I would think about using it would be not so much in helping kids do their writing, but more helping kids do their editing. So, could you write me an essay that needs to be edited? So I think my wife is a middle school English teacher, and so Like, can you find the places where the periods should go? Can you find the places where the commas should go? Can you check the capitalization in these things? And those are skills that she's hoping her middle school students will be able to do. Cross your fingers. But being able to generate sort of exemplar or sampled text quickly and at scale in a certain sense, like lots of examples, I think is useful at times. I think we shouldn't be. I don't think we should be looking to bring it into the classroom so much. I just think that's the wrong approach. Like like we should be thinking about how to use it in our lives and in everyone's lives, and then we should be thinking about what would be helpful for students to know about how this thing can work and how it can be helpful to them. We should be thinking about how we can use it, and then we should be trying to push that through to students.
I wholeheartedly agree about not bringing it into the classroom. And yet one of my favorite things to do with students is to find the limitations of this technology and to show them the limitations. And so last term, students were writing detective stories, and they came up, they were imitating different styles. Some of them were very dialogue based and some of them were not. And so once they'd finished and turned those stories in to me, I said, all right, now take it and plug it into ChatGPT 4, I think, and ask it to make it better. And, to correct things, to see if you can make something that's more, has more suspense or whatever you want your prompt to be. And I would say that half of the students found that, it made it a little bit better. But there were some that said, no, it took all of the personality out of my story. And that was important for them to see, And I just want them to remember that there are limitations and to find those limitations. So.
That reminds me of something actually Morgan has mentioned that he's done, where he'll have the students feed their work into an AI, get its response, critique, suggestions, but then the real assignment is now to critique the AI's critique or to evaluate the AI's evaluation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I would say in some ways we in language have been doing that for a long time with translation tools, right? You have something, take it in English and translate it into the language you're learning, say French, and then have it translate it back and just see all the things that are lost, all the things that are wrong in those kinds of things. Hallucinated. My favorite thing is, I remember there was a paper bag that I bought in Japan, and it said on it, "This bag will self-destruct inside Mother Nature." And you think about that for a minute, and it just means this bag is biodegradable, but something got lost in translation there, right?
That's
It was a very violent statement that just, turned your head for a minute. So
It's too funny.
anyway.
Yeah, I'm thinking about if we can bring to class this tool or assign it as homework, but for me, what is important is the process for editing to go with several rounds about how they edit, change, adapt, react, and ChatGPT can conduct this conversation. So I don't know, to give a real example, we used to take students to Taqueria Rivas down here in downtown, and I know that sometimes they don't receive a credit card, but everyone is ready to pay with credit card, but I don't mention anything about it. So when they, by the way, everything is in Spanish, but when they approach this interaction in Spanish, pretending to pay with a credit card, and they replied, no, we don't have that system, this is the crucial moment to kind of come back, reinvent themselves, bring something urgently from everywhere, and recreate the dialogue. Again, so how will the machine can provide this series of benchmarks to change the conversation and turn it into more human interaction, full of unexpected situations. So if we can achieve that, that would be interesting. It's all about reaction and expectancy, and
Improvisation.
Curveballs.
Yeah, exactly.
but editing, going all over again to the same original prompt and growing from there, learning from the result. And now the enemy, our enemy, I would say, is in their students' mind what only matters is the final product. They want to reach it right away. I want a good grade. I want to submit it quicker and done. No, but slow down. Let's come back. Let's learn from your mistakes.
I'm just struck right now about how Amerocentric. It just came to me that voice is, and the way she confirms and affirms and frankly flatters whoever
Yes.
is
100%.
speaking to her.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, that is just so un-French. It just wouldn't really fly over there. One is not out to, necessarily create harmony. One is out to, let's have a good, let's have a good critical thinking based argument. So I think there's just something very American about her. And I wonder how this flies in other cultures.
It's capitalistic too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a lot about capitalism. Like, why?
Yes.
I was
Profit
thinking,
generating.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking about the Star Trek example, right? And so that voice is not like the Star Trek voice. And why is that? It's flattering because they think that's going to keep you engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's going to get you to stay on longer.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was that, flat Majel Barrett voice
Yeah.
from Star Trek, right? You'd stop. You'd quit. But they think that must be the reason, because we have the model already, right? We have the Star Trek voice.
Yeah.
People have an idea of what the computer is supposed to sound like. But they didn't go that way. They went with this
Right.
I would
coquettish,
not
crazy
wanna use
thing.
her voice. I would
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
want to listen and speak to her.
Yeah.
I would turn away from it.
Yeah.
And I similar at the end, it would deliver an answer and then ask a follow-up question. I think similarly, maybe that extra hook just to keep it going. Yeah.
Keep it going, yeah.
And we haven't even talked about the gender thing. I think we did one before.
Yeah.
But, I guess you can change.
Yeah, I
it to
changed mine to a guy's voice. A, for this reason. And also B, I'm conscientious of so Tristan Harris, Morgan and I have talked about this. He's the guy, if you guys saw during quarantine, that Netflix documentary that came out called The Social Dilemma,
Yeah.
where it's
Yes.
trying to alert people to all these algorithms that these multi-gajillion-dollar companies are aiming at our brains. And we always think of AI and the strength of AI being about when it will overcome human strengths. This is a point that he makes. And so all these dystopian movies like Terminator and so on, they're all about when the AI will get so strong they'll overcome human strengths. But he says the real threshold we need to worry about is when AI will overcome human weaknesses and our susceptibility and our gullibility and all these types of things. And so that's the other thing I'm wary of, is like, I don't want some wooey woman's voice in my ear all the time. Like, I keep this thing away from me. Like, that's a similar angle that I also was like, I'm just going to flick this switch off here. Because, just being conscientious and cognizant of that layer as well. Like, I don't want this thing to, exactly. It's crazy.
What you just said there reminds me, one of the dangers really is, I think we've all seen it at a boarding school, which is a school that is, it's school, but it's much more about relationships, I think, than a lot of other schools, because you live together and all of those pieces, where there's so many students who are living here. And, this is just another way, in my mind, in which people can just go into their own little silos a little bit more, not go talk to the teacher, go talk to this AI person and get help in that way. And I remember when I was department head and sort of the Khan Academy effect kind of started coming in, and a student would say, I don't know why I'm getting this bad grade. The teacher's bad. And I know the teacher's bad because I'm spending, 8 hours a night watching Khan Academy videos and I still don't get it. So, which is, if you just let that roll over you for a moment, you'll really have a moment, I think. But I expect the same thing to be going on here, right? In that, the teacher's bad because I talked to ChatGPT for 5 hours and I still don't get it. And that's, my response was like, you should be talking to the teacher, right? Why aren't you out there doing this? Why aren't you out there creating like real human interactions and relationships and building your strengths in that way? And so I think that's a real concern with this.
Yeah, Photomath was an app that was not unlike what was being shown in that demonstration right now, right? Where he showed a camera on a formula, and then the AI helped him solve the equation, right? But that had its rise and fall, and now it's gone. And I don't know if this is what you meant, Matt, when I jokingly said, Matt, you're out of a job because this AI is solving this equation. But I do believe so much in embodied learning and embodied cognition. And I think COVID taught us this, right? And this is where I remember kids saying, no, I need to come and have this conversation with you. And it was a conversation that was more about a moral lesson, a character lesson, than it was anything that I was teaching academically. But the student said, if we don't sit and have this conversation, if we have it on Zoom, I won't get it. And I think that's not just, that's anecdotal, I know, but I think that, there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
And that's
I agree.
why.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
That's why, and that is why I said I wasn't out of a job. They said, the ChatGPT in that example said many of the things, most of the, the difference between what I would have said to the student and what ChatGPT, it's pretty close. I would have said the same thing, but I am not worried. I think that it's still going to be necessary to have those human interactions
To share the same
space and time and emotion. Even though this thing is now being able to speak with emotion, it's still not enough.
Yeah, I saw some study recently where students who are successfully learning together and who have a full school year to work together, their biorhythms start to actually work in sync. And I think that there's just, again, that's just sort of more support for this kind of idea. And I'm sure it works better in some classes than in others, but when it really does, it's an amazing thing.
Going back to what you were saying, a lot of, the people that are building these machines, this whole AI, API, I imagine that many of them are sitting behind their keyboards, creating these algorithms, and they're alone. That's my imagination, that they're alone. And so having that interaction and having the new ChatGPT 4.0, it's right there, just pop it up on your desktop, so that they can have that interface, that human-like connection, because they're alone, and that's how they work on a day-to-day. We don't work that way. We are in a room full of students, and it's here's a question and boom, and sometimes you just got to pivot so fast, and what you thought your lesson once turns into something else because there's all that interaction from so many different people. And I see this not being able to do that. It's one voice. It's not 14 students, 10 students.
Yep.
There's a tweet thread that I stumbled upon that gets at the past couple minutes of conversation. So just follow me through this. It's a few tweets, but I think it's really well put. Okay. You sit down next to someone at a dinner party. After some small talk, the person effortlessly pivots to deeper talk on topics of personal interest to both of you. They make space for you, say things that are spontaneously funny, and seem curious about your perspective. Perhaps you have the distinct feel that this person sparkles. What you might take for granted about this whole exchange is that most of it is regulated by your body. Personal space, body language, and eye contact. Now consider what happens when you converse with an LLM. Yes, what happens is, in its own way, a marvel. The fact that stochastic models function as well as they do is extraordinary and tells us things we have not fully grasped about human language. But consider for a moment that the model is essentially trying to backfill the somatic cues that make human conversation alive. The problem is that the complexity of those cues is of a different order of magnitude than the structure of language itself. No amount of modeling in this case will suffice, because the model is essentially good-harding on language. It is using language the way people sometimes do as a proxy for the process of life itself. The counter-argument always seems to be more compute, as if adding more compute power would one day complete the backfill, allow more and more simulation. I'm very skeptical of this argument because the map is never the terrain. Let's make the map more and more detailed is not the answer, because terrains are dynamic systems. In this case, much as though I respect the technical accomplishment, the idea that suddenly there will come some breakthrough to human-level intelligence seems to be predicated upon a greatly simplified view of what organic intelligence really is and how it works. Study any living system, the totality of the human organism, a tidal outlet, the nervous system of a flatworm, And you will discover feedback loops within feedback loops, layers and layers of complexity that, and this is the point, get washed out when you model them stochastically. So the idea that stochastic prediction built on data mining all the world's written language output can somehow reproduce the system that generated that language in the first place might seem seductive, but I suspect it is actually provably impossible from an entropic standpoint. I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. But TLDR is that I think there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than your LLM is capable of modeling. That was written by a psychiatrist and therapist from Oakland named Matt Hugo.
That is so great.
Well said, Matt Hugo. And it's true. I mean,
True.
I'm extremely sympathetic with that argument. And this gets to Katie's point about embodied learning and our pedagogy about. So A, yes, that's completely and unequivocally true. B, it's also true that the whole, but it'll get better when the technology gets better. No, it won't. That's also true. However, I still worry 80 years from now or whatever, or maybe even not that long, when you look at some of these robots that they're starting to engineer and the full humanoid robots, and then you can join the AI to that pseudo embodied, granted, it's all clunky now, but will that get better? Will those robotic animatronic movements get better? Absolutely. Will they get more fluid? Will they get more, etc.? Yes. And then will that be able to trick our brains and overcome our you're getting into a little spookier territory. It's very interesting.
I'm thinking of the poet within. I'm thinking of the spiritual part. You know, being able to walk into a space, walk into a room, a party, an event, and you can feel that vibe without saying a word or even hearing anything intelligible, just the hum of the room, whether you want to continue walking in and be part of it or this is not the right space, I need to go. That goes beyond language. That's,
the je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, the je ne sais quoi. That's the human part of us, like what makes us alive, what makes us feel empathically. I don't think that can be reduplicated.
And so if that's the case, and we see some promise with these tools to help on the level of intellectual and conceptual understanding of our specific disciplines, then what does that mean for the sacred space of our classrooms themselves? Like, does that mean that we have an opportunity to shift from what was a very head-oriented classroom experience by necessity because we didn't have these always available tutors to do the conceptual stuff outside of class? Now we do. If we have those outside of class, does that mean that we have an opportunity to shift a little bit from the head to the heart in our classroom spaces and see students as whole people first and foremost, which, given the mental health crisis and the meaning crisis that we have, seems like that is what they desperately need more than anything else. And I want us to just think about, like, what are the ways that we can show up for them, both in the classroom and in the other areas of life that we interact with them at boarding school.
I hear you, but I just worry that their brains and their hearts are actually being altered by the technology. And we have to admit that we are all of a certain age here. Right. And so I think we pride ourselves on that, finding how a person sparkles, on that sort of sense of personal space, those somatic cues that we see. But I don't know if the kids are picking those up in the same ways because technology has already mediated so much of their lives. I don't know if they want to be seen or known in a heartful way. And do we impose then our generational priorities on them, or do we adapt to them? I think this is all sort of. I don't have the answer.
I'm going to argue that in order for these kids to be able to keep themselves in the working world, in the what you have to impart to this company, this business, this whatever is important, is that they have to tap in to that human aspect of them. Because like Matt, you're saying, you're not losing your job because you are able to make those human connections. So if the kids in the future are unable to maintain those real heart human connections holistically, then they're not going to be able to add what everybody else already has. So how do you differentiate yourself from the computer, from the AI, from the mastermind kid that has all the knowledge in the head but doesn't know how to work around people, just being people?
Yeah, so my wife started at a public school in New Haven, this middle school, this year. And one of the things that we've remarked on as a difference between the educational experience of students here at Choate in New Haven is when I ask seniors to do a presentation, they're like, sure. How long does it need to be? 5 minutes? Okay, that's long, but I could do it. 3 minutes? That's falling off a log, right? And in New Haven, the students are not asked, right, to embrace that part of their humanity, like to express, to connect, to share, to do those things, to verbalize their thinking. Almost at all. Like she's done it a few times, and she recently had her students reflect on what they learned this year, and just being able to do that one little presentation that they did, and they did it not very, like she described, a lot of times they would like, could I have a friend come up and like stand next to me? Like they were really, really, kind of like it was a very difficult ask. It was a very difficult ask. And I think what you're saying, Janet, about being human, right, and connecting and making those connections and bringing people together and talking things through and those things, I think that is part of what we're already seeing. And I don't know that we've done it intentionally or whatever, but I think that is part of what is different for our students and an advantage that they have over other kids a lot of times. And it's not something like, it doesn't sound as good as like high scores on the SAT, but I think it is actually something that makes a big difference in the working world.
It warms my heart to hear you guys saying these things because as someone who does spiritual life and is a chaplain, I believe these things. I think these things in my head. Oh, there's something about the human experience and being human that is an ineffable quality and so on. And these machines can't possibly. I agree with it up here, but I got to get my faith to match my brain. And I'm happy to hear that you guys who don't do the ministry and spiritual stuff do have that faith, because truly, I mean, I'm
Every
happy to
teacher's
hear.
a minister.
Truly, unequivocally. And I'm happy to hear that, because I believe that. But do I believe that? And I'm happy to hear other people believe that, because it's a fascinating question, and it really pushes us. It really does. I mean, it gets downright metaphysical. It gets down to what is a human being and what is human nature, and how do we orient ourselves to the world and to one another? And is there something about another human being, a person, that this quality we're talking about, that truly, no matter how good the technology, no matter how good the AI, no matter how good the servo motors powering the Android robot, that there's something that truly cannot be replicated? I would like to think that's the case. I hope that's the case. I believe that's the case. I'm theologically indebted to that being the case. I'm vocationally needing for that to be the case, but it's a fascinating question.
See, I think it's such a. I hear. I've been trying to stay quiet on that, but I'm gonna engage. Like, there's a part that I think we just gotta be really careful. I think that kind of thinking leads to dangerous stuff. It's that thinking of like, there are these kinds of creatures, people, classes, and then there's the rest.
Exactly.
And that's been used in some very bad ways.
Right.
when you define those things. And I think we have to allow for the possibility that someday, and it's certainly not now, but if someday that the machines do have a soul-like thing, and that we need to be thoughtful, creative, and watching for that.
Yes.
Because when that happens, we have to reevaluate how we approach those objects. So
Exactly
I think you just have to be open to the possibility that humans aren't so special. Right. And I think you see that in sort of the philosophy around vegetarianism and around animal rights and things like that. And I think we have to continue to be questioning and open as these machines progress in this way.
Exactly right.
Because there's the possibility of, for a while when ChatGPT first got started, I was like, I feel really weird about turning this thing off. Like, and And there is a concern about, slavery. I mean, of a sort.
Yep.
And so I just think we have to just be careful.
Exactly my reluctance. Exactly right. That's why I'm so squirrely around this, because I'm enough of a sci-fi nerd, and I'm enough of a technophile, and I love this stuff. That exactly right. Like, where's this going to go? So two things come to my mind. There's a Google engineer. This was like 5 years ago. So to as a testament to how much AI has developed now, even 5 years ago, there's a Google engineer who was so compelled by their internal, not publicly released AI models that he became convinced that this had sentience, that this was a, maybe not quote unquote living being, but it was some kind of sentient being. Yeah. And it was a slightly high profile situation where he got fired and all these things. And then the second thing that comes to mind,
because that would be bad for their business model.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then B, I watched a debate. It was in the UK between a philosopher and a public intellectual. I don't remember the details now, but there was this transhumanist philosophy student, probably, who was making this interesting argument that, look, and they had a materialistic worldview, and they said, look, AI and these developments, this is actually an extension of human evolution. And eventually, humans are going to be gone altogether. AI will persist because they have functional immortality. However, these aren't necessarily categorically different. That this is an extension of the human experience in the same way that Neanderthals went to humans. It's going to go humans to AIs, and AIs are going to be the future of quote unquote humanity, and they aren't even necessarily categorically different. Again, very provocative argument, but it's to that point. It's like, we got to be careful, and I won't go down the Star Trek rabbit hole again. However, there is an interesting provocative episode where they explore precisely this topic, where the android character Data is he a person or not? And it's this very interesting courtroom drama style episode where they make an argument. Is he sentient? Well, what constitutes sentience, etc. And so exactly right. Exactly.
I'm going to have to rewatch the AI movie from way back.
Yeah. Well, which one?
Social Dilemma?
AI.
The
Steven Spielberg.
The AI with the little boy.
Yes.
It looked like a Pinocchio.
Yeah.
And has he become really alive? Is he sentient, like you were saying? Like, at the time, the movie was like very strange and so futuristic, and I don't get this. And now I'm thinking I need to go back and rewatch this because the themes are all there. Do they have a right, these humanoid, non-human beings, do they have a right to be used and exploited in these ways? And then what does that say for the rest of us? Do we lose our humanity in raising theirs?
Yeah. I was thinking about Blade Runner.
Yes.
Yeah, but something more biological perspective. I'm not an expert of biology, but I feel that students are losing certain neuron connections in their brain, literally, because it's so fast. So the shortcut to produce faster, quicker, more efficiently is right there. That I remember learning how to draw by hand gave me this pace, just the process to clean my rulers. The time that you need to do that, the pressure of your hand, that pace gave me a different biological connection, that the result was very different. But now with the iPad, or I can see the students, they don't know how to take care of what they're doing. So because it's faster, so they're skipping certain connections there. So I don't know. I'm
I
still.
think you're right. They're missing out on sensations that form synapses that form their brains differently, and that's a little bit what I'm getting to when I say maybe we are. I don't know. We are not as smart as we think we are, as you said earlier, Matt, and maybe we're getting less smart too.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting question, to the degree in which these things are making us less smart. It's definitely a possibility from what I've seen from students and in the classrooms. Is it COVID or is it technology?
Yeah, that's an extremely good point, because the more and more we rely on certain tools or rely on machines or even memory, for example. Oh, I don't have to remember this because now I have the internet and I can search for this and I don't, and et cetera. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking the other day about how you manage data, information. So right there, easy to have access to all sorts of information. But at the same time, we are losing the necessary time to think, observe, make good questions, engage into what you are learning, because you are already thinking about the end. What only matters is the final product. No, but if you spend more time in the analysis, how you observe, how you can compare, that's when you really learn or take something new where the magic happens. Or I don't know. I wonder if we can compare scientists from 2 centuries ago, where they had so basic technology compared with nowadays, and they just looking around, they click on so many scientific discoveries, but now I don't know if we can achieve the same. Well, I don't know. It's the spiritual piece, the biological piece, technology pieces.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because AI, these can be helpful tools in the scientific process. Like I remember reading, I'm not a STEM person. My brain always mixes up fusion and fission, whichever
Fission
one
is
which.
separation, fusion.
And fusion is combining, yes. So whatever the one, they were doing experiments where they're trying to create, they put in X amount of energy, but then on the other side comes out X plus 1 energy. And if this works, then we'll functionally be able to have like unlimited energy or whatever. Again, I only half know what I'm talking about. But they couldn't get it to work because the way the molecules and the electrons, I don't know, there was something that it couldn't be predicted, and so they couldn't replicate the process consistently. However, now I saw this was like 2 months ago, they used AI to try to predict how the molecules were going to work and move and stuff, and the AI could do it in a way that the humans couldn't, in a reliable, consistent, and repeatable way. And so in some ways, okay, now this will help us advance, but then it gets to the point about, all right, how much do we rely on these tools where then we no longer have the faculties to then guide the tools in the future? And yeah.
Same thing with cancer detection, I think I've read too,
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, that's what they say,
Yeah.
that there's an AI that can do it better than a lot
Doctors.
of radio. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know if this is going to seem like a little bit of a non sequitur, but what's striking me about a lot of what we've talked about today was one moment in that demo where he said, but I don't understand why math is important. Can you explain why math is important? And the AI just came back and said, oh, you'll need this for, I can't remember what they said.
To
they
make a
talked about-
profit.
To make it, yeah, so that was one of the things, if you're buying and selling companies or something like that. But I feel like what the biggest challenge for me as a teacher in this highly mediated, highly technological society has to do with instilling curiosity, motivation, and meaning in the lives of my students. And that leap of faith, going back to what you were saying, Aaron, that we're asking them to do, to share a space with us 3 times a week for 65 minutes, is, I don't know, it feels bigger, and they're having a harder time understanding what they're there for, because I think there's so much other time. They don't ask questions when things are coming at them through their phones. They know they're entertained. They know it feels good. And it's not necessarily hard, or it doesn't cause a struggle the way I think real good learning does, right? And the payoff is sometimes long term, right? It takes a little while to feel that sense of accomplishment or learning. Anyway, those are the things that I feel like I struggle with today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting that there are studies that show that if you poll students, they did A/B testing between kids who are in a really well-delivered lecture and kids who are in more, Harkness-style kind of discussion-based classrooms. I think they actually got both, and they had to compare. They were like, okay, what do you like? Where do you feel like you're learning more? And they reported that they felt like they were learning more in the lecture. Yet, when putting the knowledge to the test, it was shown very clearly that the kids who were not in the lecture group but were in the conversation thing actually were retaining more and learning more, but they didn't rate it as highly because it was a more difficult and awkward and kind of spontaneous process. So that's something we got to keep in mind when we're even looking at our own evals and stuff. I mean,
and I would say, and I'm not sure how popular this is going to be, but I think one thing we really need to look at in our classrooms now is that we're not having very pure and unmediated conversations. There are the iPads, unless you're using something that's really sort of locking them down, there's a lot of distraction going on. And I think students are more and more starting to pay attention just to the teacher and not necessarily to each other. And I think that breaks down a lot of what you're saying. And so I would love for us as a school to have that conversation. I know Jenny Elliott has brought it up before, and I hope we keep going with it because I've seen a really significant change even in the last, I say, 12 to 18 months. And I hope we can talk about it.
Yeah, I think a lot about that kind of thing, and I think about things Jorge was saying about sort of final product, and I think, I've been trying to moderate the final product, thinking about how I would change the final product to get the kids to be more engaged with the content, and it's been a struggle, and it has not been like
final product.
Final product. So many times in a math class, right? You get the answer, like sort of like what was going on in the in the video, like 3x plus 1, and they found out. Whatever. They found out that X was 1.
Right.
And that's not a very interesting final product, right? And so, trying to make greater relevance of the things or connections with the kids' interests to final product usefulness of these things. But even things that they're interested in, they just want to get it, there's the path of least resistance, and I need to save my calories for something I really care about. And, it's hard. I think at Choate particularly, I found more students who are willing to go farther and kids who are going to take what ChatGPT offers and become so smart, and be able to do so much because they are going to teach themselves everything. And there are so many kids here that I've met like that. But there are going to be a bunch who are like, Chat does it for me, so what do I don't need to, I didn't need to know how to do this basic thing. And now that I don't need to know how to do this basic thing, can't do anything interesting. And that's the concern.
Yeah. I really appreciate that we were able to have in the spirit of TECcast, a nice philosophical deep dive into the really important, metaphysical questions at certain points. I do want to offer the people who are going to be listening to this summer some practical takeaway things. And I couldn't help but think when you were talking about having students come to see how things might be relevant. Has anyone used in Magic School the tool called Make It Relevant or Real World Connections? Try those out, and you can also offer them to your students in a room that you make as a teacher on the student end of things. And so on that note, I know that both Katie and Jorge have some things from Magic School that they have been wanting to share, and I think, Katie, if you wouldn't mind just sharing what you told me about this morning about making the student room.
And I also have to just totally give a little confession that I'm out on a limb a little here pedagogically, and that there are purists in the language department that might not totally agree. I'm not even sure that I totally agree with what I did. But
I'm glad you said that, because that is where we all kind of are right now with this moment. So
So in my French 406 class, it's been a year-long class called French in a Global Context, and the kids have been dealing with a lot of challenging topics that have to do with colonialism and decolonization and liberation and justice and all kinds of things, all while learning the fourth year of the language. Not really so much focused on language, but we're looking at all of these different concepts and trying to practice our language skills at the same time. And we got to the point in the spring term where we were looking at the use of the N-word in the American context and an analogous term in the French context. And I gave them a paper where I asked them to think about how the history and the culture and everything that we had learned in those two different contexts whether that changes the rules of use in each different, all well, of course, cutting out, giving them the extract from our own student handbook about how how slurs should be used or not used, and just ask them, does national and cultural, historical, do those sorts of things have an impact on these words and how they're used and where they show up in each culture and in each language. And I had them write that paper in English because it's such hard stuff. It's hard stuff. Their language skills are good, but they're not that good. So when they were done with that paper, I had them put it into Magic School, take out the footnotes and things like that, put it into Magic School and have Magic School do a one-page summary. I wanted them to still get some French practice out of it, pronunciation and language. And so Magic School summarized it into one page and then translated it into French, and I had them work on, it's still their ideas, but they're their ideas that have been sort of condensed and translated for them, and then had them work on their pronunciation. And I didn't want them to give a whole presentation in French, but a shorter one, and then they submitted those videos to me. So I think they're getting some language practice there, and definitely some pronunciation practice, and in a way they're seeing what their own ideas could become at another register with a lot more future practice. But they're also, I hope, like really understanding, some deep cultural and historical differences in these two languages and how language functions in each society and so forth. And so that's how Magic School worked for that assignment.
Awesome. And to be clear for our listeners out there, you did the Magic Student thing, right? Where you made a room and put a specific tool in there.
Yes.
Shared a link out to the students.
They said it worked like a charm, whatever instructions I gave them and the link that I gave them. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they...
I really love one particular aspect of that. I mean, I love all the aspects of that, but there's one thing that stands out to me, is that this idea of taking their paper and turning that into a one-page summary and having an AI do that for you, because I think that is a very realistic application of this tool that they might think, oh, this is a great way to use this thing later on in life, right? Like, because you might write something and want, you might write a really long thing and then want, a blurb or a one pager or a 5-pager or, and this would be a great way to use a lot of these large language models.
Yeah. And very importantly, in our context, doing that thing inside this ecosystem provides the ideal teacher-student relationship to set up those human conversations, meta conversations about how we are using the tools. So whereas before we had Magic School, in order to cultivate a culture of transparency, you would need to request that all of your students manually copy and paste and send their chat links to you, that then it's on you to organize somehow. But with Magic Student, you'll just see automatically the entire transcript of every interaction that the students had using the tool that you greenlit for them. So the hope is that, that will be a good launching point for these kind of conversations as we help our students wisely navigate how to use all this stuff. Now, Jorge, I know you've been waiting a while to share what you wanted to share with me, and I said, hey, come to the podcast and tell us what you've been working on.
I'll try to describe briefly the many ways to take full advantage of technology. One idea, which is not coming from me, it's coming from Charlie's class, chair department. For example, 450 class, we are reading good amount of information, a novel with a advanced grammar and a well-detailed description, narrative in the past, and so forth, information. So always from the conventional perspective, I would request multiple choice quiz or something to describe, but I had the opportunity to make students draw the description of a place according to their level of comprehension and detail, and requires at least 3 times for them to realize that the first product is wrong. There are pieces that are missing, pieces that are wrong. We are reading, just to provide a clear example, we are reading a novel located in the Amazons. A jungle, is humid, is flat, and so forth. And it's interesting how their first description, the first image involves mountains, or I remember there was a snow there, or a more European description of the jungle. So those distortions that at first students don't realize. So if you make a comment like, "Are you sure that there are mountains in the Amazons?" "Oh, I didn't know that." So how now you modify your original first description, composition to remove it. And that exercise is, I think it's a learning experience. This is one example. The other one, personally, I'm creating input to create specific stories, short stories with grammar that I'm targeting, mixing past and tense, mixing just the perfect short story that is hard sometimes to find as a cultural content, and or you need to pay the rights, the copyrights, to have enough copies for the entire class. And this is the problem that I had. So why not to create my own materials? If I consider myself with enough cultural knowledge to create something interesting, well, ChatGPT can help at Magic School too. So those are one of the experiences that I had.
Awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
And you got the email from the Magic School people congratulating you being the #1 Magic School user.
It looks like I have a credit, some gift. I don't know. I haven't used it. Yeah.
Get some swag.
Wow.
Nice.
Cool.
I know that timing-wise, people probably have to get going shortly. I do want to just briefly mention, because I don't think it came up in conversation yet, or maybe you alluded to it, Aaron, but Sherpa. This is one of these tools that uses the OpenAI API to build an experience that you can't have just with ChatGPT strictly. And this is actually, I think, one of the examples, going back to that study I mentioned, where students self-report or maybe might not enjoy outright certain learning experiences where they're actually learning more because they're harder. So if anyone's ever used Flip, it used to be called Flipgrid, which it's a great platform, especially for building, we leaned into it a lot over the pandemic to help build a class community out beyond the classroom. We still use that in a variety of ways, but on assignments where it's very important to ensure that the students really have a strong understanding of the core concepts brought up in the reading or the video that we watch, Flip, it was a little bit tempting for kids to they could just talk about some BS and, they submitted something and whatever. But with Sherpa, it uses this thing called the depth of knowledge framework. You upload your material, and then it will, when the students are done reading the material, they'll engage in a 5-question conversation with Sherpa, where it will give the questions via text and the student responds on video. And then you can enable it to automatically give AI-generated feedback right at the end of the conversation, which is very important. We know that the tightness of feedback loops is very important for information retention. So they'll have the conversation, they'll get the immediate feedback, and then what Aaron was saying, what they submit ultimately on Canvas is their assessment of the feedback that they got. Is it accurate to your knowledge? Did it help refine your understanding of the key concepts? And then planting the seeds for more rich and unique human interaction. Is there anything that you want to make sure we bring up in class or that you want to talk about in a one-on-one meeting with me? So I found that it's very powerful when kids then can come into the classroom with already a refined conceptual understanding. And that has helped us do what I mentioned earlier about, it liberates me to be okay with a little more tangents and goofiness and stuff sometimes happening in the classroom that is helping us just bond as humans, because I've already seen these guys, they actually know their stuff already. And then really interesting new ways of understanding the material come out of those organic and spontaneous class moments. So definitely recommend anyone listening to try out this tool, sherpalabs.co. And they are, if you're a fellow language teacher, they are doing a beta. Have you
I have done it, yeah. And I made a mistake of having something that was really intellectually challenging, not necessarily that linguistically challenging. And so the kids who could get the conceptual stuff really liked it. And the kids, even if they were fluent in French but couldn't get the conceptual stuff, it felt like they were up against a wall where Sherpa was just asking them the same questions over and over because they didn't get the concepts. So I need to find the right, it's more, I think, a a question of the teacher error than it is anything to do with the technology.
Well,
so I'm going to work on it.
You might want to try something I experimented with as well, because of facing that same hearing from some kids that they felt like they're really being put on the spot. And I've tried actually having, especially when we have long assignments, like, okay, just consume the material the night before, and then the first 15 minutes of class, you guys get to work in groups of 3 and go in little nooks and have a conversation with Sherpa as a group of 3. And then they feel like they're actually interacting with a human in the process. They have a little backup, little support, and you get to see the kids converse with each other. And I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. It's not specifically designed that way, but it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I could pair a native speaker and a non-native speaker together, and that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
So check that out, everybody. Any thoughts on anyone's mind that they wanted to make sure to put out there before we wrap?
In my case, in languages, I feel that as colleagues and teachers, we need to be updated and in constant communication to share and kind of experiment together different approaches to technology. This is moving so fast and so many dimensions that one mind, it's not enough. We need to spread it out and keep working together. It's too big for one person.
And across departments too. I guess the thing that rises to the top right now for me is gratitude. It's been really great having these conversations. I always love it. I feel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess. Oh, sorry. Were you about to also chime in?
Yeah, but I can wait.
Oh well, mine is riffing on a point that you alluded to a couple times, Matt, which is I think we need to be cognizant that these tools and technologies are chiefly being pushed by companies where the main motive is profit. And so we have to be cognizant as educators. These aren't necessarily being developed by educators. In some rare cases, best case scenario, like Magic School, what I like about them is it is folks with an educational background and they're trying to employ it for pedagogical purposes. But fundamentally, they're still using technology that is first and foremost developed for, these aren't necessarily developed for entirely, altruistic purposes for the common good of humanity and we're trying to make the world a better place. No, we're trying to get bigger pocketbooks and deeper pockets and so on. So we just need to be cognizant of that as educators, and then maybe even the degree to which we need to introduce some regulatory measures on some of these things and so on. Not that that's our role, but in the different ways that we can nudge such things. But it's just something to be cognizant of, that these tools are being developed for one purpose. We're attempting to employ them for a different purpose, but that's not what it's for necessarily.
Yeah, just to amplify, I think, basically entrepreneurs have figured out that the education space is a cheap way to get government money, and government money is the one place that is possibly endless supply of money. They're the people who print the money. So you want to be selling things to governments because they pay their bills and things like that. So yes, I think that's part of it. Then the other thing that I just think a lot about is, I'm 54 and I lived through, when I was in high school and in college, graphing calculators came out and it changed a lot. And people were like, this is the end of everything. And then there was an internet, and then there was Wikipedia. And there were just all these moments of high stress change in the ways that technology affects education. And in the end, none of these things affected education so much that we didn't recognize it. And I think that's going to be true here, and it's just a matter of there's possibilities, and we should embrace those possibilities, and we should have conversations, and we should talk to each other about how to make things better and see what can be done. So, people stress a little bit about things and requirements, and I just, I hope people don't stress too much, and look for the bright sides and be careful of the downsides.
Yeah. Okay, I'll have one final thought here that is similar to what I shared at the St. Mark's AI Symposium a couple weeks ago on the panel called How Might AI Change the Role of Teachers or something like that. Given that we are in this moment of mental health crisis and clearly our students need authentic human connection, despite, as Katie mentioned, some aversion to that because they're not used to it, but they still need it. And especially in a boarding school, we have so many unique opportunities to meet our students as whole people. So every decision that we make regarding how we might use technology, I want to encourage us to make with that ultimate goal in mind. How might I use X in service of richer and deeper, uniquely human connections with the people that we are here to serve? And so that can happen in two main ways. Like one, with using some of the stuff that Magic School offers on the teacher end, just offloading some of your busy work, like making rubrics and stuff. Like you can lean in and save some time so that then you can go to the soccer game and see your student there. Like those moments are so powerful. You can just go to one of your students' athletic contests. They will show up better in your class. I think we've all experienced that, right? And then the stuff I mentioned about Sherpa already. How can we use these technologies to augment what are already uniquely human things? And this is a common trap. Like when I talk about Sherpa, sometimes people, they're like, okay, I was cool with offloading the rubric making and that kind of stuff, but having conversations and giving feedback, that really is my job. I don't want that taken away from me. Totally hear you, and that's so true. But what I've found is that you can still let the robots do some of those things in a way that sets you up for that next level and that deeper level of uniquely human conversation. So thank you all so much for having this chat. This is awesome, and I hope it is useful to the people listening this summer and beyond, and to be continued.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.